Hello everyone and welcome to the Dill Pickle Movie Network. Welcome to my Best of the Fest video for the Sundance Film Festival 2022. Now, as most people know, the Sundance Film Festival is in Utah. Usually it's held in person, but this is the second year now where they are doing screenings virtually. So I got to go online from the comfort of my home to watch these movies, and honestly, if it was happening normally in Utah, I don't think I would have been able to go all the way there. So I'm really grateful for this virtual opportunity. While I do think films should be seen in the way they were intended to be seen by the directors, I still think in the state we are in now, as a country, as a nation, and as a globe, as a whole world, I think it's really nice that there is this virtual option so more and more people can experience these films. I hope going forward there is some sort of hybrid in-person virtual aspect to the Sundance Film Festival and all film festivals. I think it's so great that so many more people now are able to discover these films. But if you weren't at the Sundance Film Festival, if you weren't able to see it, this is what this video is for. It's to recommend my favorites of the festival to you, tell you about some films I liked, some I didn't like, and ultimately give you my top 5 Sundance 2022 films. Before I get to my top 5, I want to highlight a few films in particular. This was a really strong year for sci-fi. I have 2 science fiction films in my top 5, which I'll get to later, but there's another one that I want to mention, and that is After Yang. After Yang is the next film from director Kogonada, who you might recognize. He directed the film Columbus a few years ago. The film is an A24 film about a family dealing with the loss of an AI that they call Yang. This AI came into the family as a way to be a companion, almost like an older brother, to this young daughter who is adopted, to kind of teach her about her Chinese roots since she is adopted from China. But as the movie unfolds, you realize how much of an effect Yang had on the whole family, not just the young daughter, but also the parents, played by Colin Farrell and Jodie Turner-Smith. This is a really interesting film because it is a sci-fi film, but it doesn't feel overly loaded with sci-fi. It doesn't feel like a Blade Runner. This is very much based in reality. This feels like a reality that is actually tangible, that can actually happen in real life. And sometimes that's the most interesting sci-fi, is the low-key sci-fi that is just fantastical enough so that it's not reality, but it is realistic enough to where you can relate to it as if this were an actual tragedy that would have happened to any family anywhere, especially in the midst of COVID. So many people are dealing with loss, and this is a great film to explore themes of grief and also to explore heritage, because this is also a story about adoption and being in touch with one's roots. I think this is a really important film. This is also the film that had the best score. This was a really great year for music, all in general. There was a film called When You Finish Saving the World, which was Jesse Eisenberg's debut. I didn't love that film, but that also had some really great music. There were also several films in my top 5 with great music. A great year for music, but After Yang's score was just so transcendent and so beautiful, so I wanted to bring up that film. A few other honorable mentions, specifically for performances. This was a really strong year for really great female performances. One comes from Rebecca Hall in the film Resurrection. This is a film about a woman who encounters someone from her younger years of life, and she has not seen this person in years. I will not tell you what the relation to this person is or who this person is even being played by. This kind of becomes your stereotypical cat and mouse chase, except there are layers of this relationship that are uncovered as the film goes along. You're not entirely sure what this relationship consists of or where it's going, and there is almost like a supernatural element that comes into play at the end as well. I think it's a really interesting film. It wasn't my particular favorite of the festival, but I think Rebecca Hall is amazing. Another film rooted in great performances is Call Jane. This is a film from director Phyllis Nagy, who wrote the film Carol, which was an Oscar-nominated film a few years ago starring Cate Blanchett and Rooney Mara. This film deals with the Call Jane initiative, which was an organization built to have women get abortions in places where they could not find access to abortions. And it's a really interesting film about a really relevant topic that I think should be discussed more today. It's a shame that this even has to be addressed nowadays, but I think this film, while it does feel a little bit conventional in its biopic storytelling, I think it's a really good film that will get a lot of people talking about a really important subject in ways that other films that might have had a little bit more nuance weren't quite able to do in terms of mainstream appeal. It's a more audience-friendly film than something like Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. Like I alluded to, the performances are really great. Elizabeth Banks is terrific in the leading role, and Sigourney Weaver just steals the show in this one. She is delivering another really great performance in her filmography, and she was definitely the MVP of that film. Another film that was actually my last film of the festival, Emily the Criminal. This is almost like an Uncut Gems, Nightcrawler-esque thriller about this woman who is getting away with a lot of criminal activity, but you find out why, her reasons behind doing so, and it kind of recontextualizes a lot of the common tropes you see about crime thrillers, and you really start to understand that this is more of a commentary on capitalism in general, and you kind of understand and empathize what this woman is going through and the means she's going about doing things. Even though they are not good means, obviously, she is doing very criminal acts, you sort of understand where she's coming from, and it's a really compelling character study in that sense. Like Resurrection, it does have a few tropes that I wasn't 100% on board with, but again, the performances. Aubrey Plaza is terrific in this film. She is an actress that has showed so much range already, specifically in her comedy, but this is a really, really dramatic performance, and it's great to see her just flex all the different abilities she has as an actress, because she has quite a bunch of really, really talented skill. One more film I wanted to mention as one of my honorable mentions before getting in my top 5 is a film called Am I Okay? This is a film directed by the couple Tig Notaro and Stephanie Aline. You might recognize them from their acting work, but they were making the jump to directing here to direct a story about coming out. This is a film that is very rooted in the LGBT themes of coming out, but it's really special because it deals with coming out at an older age. Usually films focus on coming out, focus on youth, they focus on the teenage years or early college years, but this one focuses on a woman in her 30s, coming to terms with her sexuality and just kind of exploring herself, not just with her sexuality, but with her friendships. I do think the themes of sexuality are definitely the most intriguing of the film. The stuff with the friendship is really, really nice, but it does feel a little familiar to some other films of the similar kind. But this is a really, really strong directorial effort, a really, really well-written film by writer Lauren Pomerantz, and of course the acting, like I've mentioned with a lot of these films, is really strong. Dakota Johnson especially, who I'll talk about a little bit later in another one of my films in my top 5, she delivers a great performance as this woman who's really coming to terms with herself and really finding these new layers to herself that she kind of knew were there, but are finally willing to admit to herself and admit to her best friend, who is also played by Sonoya Mizuno, who is also incredible. The two of them have a really, really genuine friendship. You think the film is going to go one way, especially by the teaser picture they showed. You think the film is going to go one way. You think this is going to be about these two best friends falling in love, but instead it's about these two best friends kind of being there for each other when one of them is coming to terms with their sexuality. It was a totally different route than I expected from this film, and it was a really, really pleasant route that it took. Before I get into my top 5, there are two films that I wasn't crazy about in the Sundance Film Festival, but they're worth mentioning because I did see these films and I want to talk about everything I saw. One of them, as I alluded to earlier, was When You Finish Saving the World. This was Jesse Eisenberg's directorial debut. I think Jesse Eisenberg shows a lot of potential as a writer. I think his quirky nature really, really shows in the writing he's doing, but unfortunately this film follows one character played by Finn Wolfhard, who's on his own path, his mother played by Julianne Moore, who's on another path, and both of those films on their own are somewhat interesting, but they don't really come together as much as I would have liked. I would have liked to see a bit more cohesion between both storylines. It feels like two separate films, except for a few rare cases in the middle where they do kind of intersect. But even when they intersect, I wanted them to have a bit more power than they did, and I don't think the resolution is incredibly earned by the journey getting there. But again, like I said earlier, the music is really good, and I think this is a film about music. Finn Wolfhard's character is a musician, and I think for the music alone, it might be worth a watch and to show a little bit of potential in Jesse Eisenberg's writing. The only real stinker of the festival for me was Lena Dunham's film Sharpstick. I'm not the most familiar with Lena Dunham's work. I haven't seen Girls, I haven't seen her other films, but this film wasn't really for me. This is something that might be compared to something like Licorice Pizza, Red Rocket. It's about a relationship with a very sizable age gap, but unlike those other films, I don't think the direction and writing here is all that intriguing, to where those other films that have similar themes, I feel like they had a lot more to say about these relationships rather than just being about these relationships. I think this is a film that is going to be a little off-putting to some because of the subject matter, and I don't think the subject matter itself was really what offset me to the movie, but it was more so the writing and the actual execution of this relationship and of these themes that just I really wasn't on board with. Jon Bernthal, though, gives a great performance. A consistent theme is that these performances are really good. So now getting into my top 5. At number 5, another sci-fi film. As I said, there's a lot of good sci-fi at the Sundance Film Fest. It is Duel. There's a really great amount of things to surprise yourself with in this film, so I'm not going to give too much away. The basic premise of this film is that a woman finds out she is terminally ill and is given the option to clone herself, to use this clone as a coping mechanism for her family and friends around her, to deal and process her death so that death is a lot easier on them, almost a substitute so that she can continue living on, except she has to teach this clone everything about her, and she has to make this clone believe that she is legitimately another continuation of herself. It's a really, really interesting film. Karen Gillan plays these two women, the one woman who is ill and her clone, and it's really great to see the subtle differences between these two characters. It's kind of funny that we've already seen Karen Gillan play two of the same character in Avengers Endgame, but here it's a much more realistic film. Like I said with After Yang, this is a sci-fi film, but the sci-fi isn't all up in front of your face. It's kind of like a background to what is really going on, which is really a compelling character study, a story about different relationships, the way we manage depression progression in the way we kind of come to terms with certain parts of our life. There's another great performance from Aaron Paul. I don't really want to tell you where this story goes because I think it's a really, really interesting story, but there are so many great twists and turns that I think a lot of people are going to have fun exploring. Riley Stearns is the director. He also directed The Art of Self-Defense. He has a really dry writing style, which I really, really like and I think really works for this film, but a lot of people who've seen this film aren't really on board with that, and I think that's what's so special about this film, is because it's not for everyone, and it has a very particular audience. And I think the best films are the ones that spark a lot of conversation about, oh, well, I didn't really like that choice, or I really like that choice. I was really on board with a lot of these choices, and I think this is a film that's going to have a lot of people talking, which is why I really recommend it. Whether or not you like it, I think it's one that is at least going to stick with you. I think it's the best premise of any of these movies. I think it is really, really smart, really, really shocking at times, and has maybe not the most satisfying conclusion, but a conclusion that really fits with the commentary it's trying to make and with the overall tone that Riley Stearns is trying to convey. At number 4, another sci-fi film, and that is Brian and Charles. This is a very, very realistic sci-fi film. This is a film about a man, Brian, who lives alone in a Welsh valley and creates a robot named Charles. He uses all these different parts that he collects in junk, and he makes this big washing machine like spare part robot with a head that kind of looks like Jim Broadbent, and he kind of talks like any old AI type and talk app you can find on your phone. The robot itself is as far as the science in the science fiction really goes. It is a fictional film that deals with science and putting together AI, so technically it is science fiction, but at its core it's really just a very, very funny and sweet, endearing mockumentary. Taika Waititi and Jermaine Clement made a really good mockumentary about vampires a few years ago with What We Do in the Shadows. This feels like a very similar type of film, except centered around something like a Frankenstein's monster, except he's a very sweet Frankenstein's monster. He really means well. Charles himself, Charles is such an endearing character. He is an AI, but you feel such warmth and such happiness towards Charles as this film continues. You also really like Brian, and I think their relationship is really, really sweet. This is a very, very odd film. It's a very quirky film. It's a very silly film, but it has a really, really great amount of heart, and I think this is one of those films that had no buzz, still doesn't really have buzz, and I hope more people discover it because it is so sweet. It takes some conventional routes, but I really, really like this film. I think this is going to be something tailor-made for anyone who loves Wallace and Gromit. Really, really silly, funny British comedy. It's a really, really sweet film, and I hope people check it out. At number 3, this might be a cheat because it did technically come out last year internationally, but it hasn't hit US theaters quite yet, and that is The Worst Person in the World. I'm not going to talk too much about this because this has been out in a lot of markets for a while. This premiered at several other film festivals, but it really is worth talking about because this is a really, really special film. This chronicles 4 years in the life of Julie, who is a young woman trying to navigate her love life, trying to navigate her career path. A lot of these films have similar themes. I don't know if it's because of the state I am in right now in my life, but there are a lot of films in this festival that spoke about the idea of being a person trying to navigate their life after college, as they grow into adulthood, that just really resonated with me this year. This is definitely one of them. This film is told in several chapters, and with each chapter there's just another layer that is just peeled away from this woman as we see her navigate her life. It ends up being really, really silly in the beginning and funny, but it gets really much more dramatic as it goes on. I think that's a really natural progression. As she grows and as she matures, she deals with more adult issues as she goes on through life and navigating these early 30s, and I think that's natural for it to get a little bit more dramatic at the end. I was not expecting to break down and cry at the end, but I did. This is a really honest story that really speaks to the truth of what it means to be lost in life but finding a path. It is a really, really stunning film, and I think it is anchored by such a great performance from Renate Reinsve. I think this is a really special film, and when it hits theaters, hopefully in the next few weeks, if it's near you, go see it, because I think it's going to get nominated for an Oscar for Best International Film. It should, and I think it might have a shot at winning. There are still some other films that are contending against it, but this is a very special film. At number 2, definitely not a coming of age or a sentimental story whatsoever. This is fresh. It is a Mimi Cave horror thriller film. It's marketed as a thriller, but I would definitely consider it a horror film. This is another film like Duel where I don't want to give anything away because it is nuts. This film is nuts. This film is shocking. This film is gross. This film is polarizing, and I fucking loved it. I think this is a film that is really going to shock people, but also really reel people in and make people lean forward in their seats, waiting to see what happens next. This film is a commentary on dating, specifically dating apps, and trying to navigate the dating life, but it does take a very, very sharp turn. The film is really worth noting because of its incredible performances from Daisy Edgar-Jones and Sebastian Stan. Sebastian Stan in particular has such a fun role to really dive into so many different flavors of his acting style. It is really, really exciting to see Sebastian Stan, this guy who's, pretty quiet as Bucky Barnes in the MCU, definitely a much darker character in I, Tonya, but I've never seen anything like this from him, and I think this is the type of performance that is really going to propel him into the next level and get him even more great jobs to really show his range as an actor. The two have such an amazing electric chemistry, especially in this first half hour. The credits don't even roll till 30 minutes in, and that's because it really takes its time setting up this relationship, setting up the atmosphere, setting up this really oozing, powerful, temptation-like sexual chemistry between the two of them that really, really just entrances you. It almost reminded me of Star is Born, that whole first hour where it's just them falling deeper and deeper in love and just discovering all the ins and outs of one another, and they don't know each other that well, but there's just this spark, this connection between them, and eventually 30 minutes in, you find out what the real crux of this story is about, but I don't want to spoil it because it's something worth watching with completely blind eyes, not knowing at all what's going to happen. I think it is one of the most rewarding, one of the most cathartic, one of the most shocking, intriguing cinematic experiences of the year. It's hitting Hulu in March, so it's going to be out for a lot of people to see. There are going to be tons of reaction videos, tons of great reactions all over the internet about this one. I have a feeling this is going to be one of the most talked about films of the year because it goes from having this really, really incredible opening act to then hitting the credits and then just taking off like a roller coaster. This is the equivalent of a theme park ride, but one that is filled with so much nuance, especially for a directorial debut. Great performances. I cannot recommend Fresh enough. But I warn you, if you're planning this for a date night, maybe hold off on the snacks. And my number one film of the year is Cha-Cha Real Smooth. I saw the title, I said, I don't know if this is going to be for me, but it absolutely was. Cooper Raiff is a director. I have not seen his prior work, Shithouse, but I was really intrigued by his Q&A beforehand. He was a young guy, almost my age, and I was watching him, and I was like, wow, this guy talks a lot like me. He carries himself a lot like me, and watching this film from the very first minutes, I was like, this is me put on screen. Like, this is a character who's so similar to myself. Obviously, there are some details about his life, this character, that is not similar to me, but it is a story that it hits so close to home. It is about someone finding his own path in life and really discovering what he wants to do with his life and kind of letting go the expectations of what society really tries to throw on you when it comes to careers and romances. But what is so special about this film and what really spoke to me is that this guy is fresh out of college. I am fresh out of college. I am less than 2 years out of college, having graduated via Zoom cam, and seeing a story about a guy who is in the exact same path as me, doesn't know what he wants to do with his life yet in terms of jobs, is struggling to find that soulmate and that relationship, really trying to cling on to every single little detail because, there's this idea that when you leave college, you all of a sudden have to just jump right into the next pool and just find your way right away. But that's not the truth. And the fact of the matter is that you need to take the time to feel the freedom, to allow yourself to breathe and allow yourself to just be a human being and enjoy your 20s. And I think this is what this film says so beautifully. I haven't really even gotten into the plot, but there is a plot line about his relationship with Dakota Johnson's character, who is the mother of an autistic daughter. You see his relationship with this daughter, Vanessa Berghart, because he ends up becoming her babysitter, but you also see the relationship with Dakota Johnson as someone who is older, who he tries to, propel his life forward with in other ways. This beautiful relationship between mother and daughter, but also this mother and him as a babysitter for this daughter. It's just such a beautiful trio of performances. It's a beautiful trio of characters. Cooper Raiff really has a love for every single one of the characters in this film. Even the smaller characters, even the smallest of storylines get so much attention and heart and warmth given to them that it feels like it covers every single area of the 20-something experience that I've not seen in a film, at least in recent memory, that has really just stood out to me like this. I felt like I could kind of therapeutically come to terms with some of the things I'm dealing with in my own life through this movie. You know, the relationships with my parents, being someone who's constantly coming home and sleeping in their house and filming videos like this in their home because I, you know, don't have the means to create a nice and big studio in my little tiny apartment in New York City. You know, romance is tough at a time like this. You know, friendships sometimes fizzle out because everyone goes a different path after college. Some people jump right into work. Some people struggle to find work. I don't know what I'm doing yet. I'm a theater major and Broadway theaters are shut down, and this is the closest thing to work I'll ever get, and I love doing this. I love talking to a camera about film, but, you know, I still am trying to figure out for myself what I want to do with my life, and Cha Cha Real Smooth just feels so honest to what is going on in my life, and it doesn't pass judgment on it either. You know, it doesn't say you need to do this or you need to do that, or people who haven't figured it out yet are immature in any way. It instead embraces it and says, no, this is the time of your life, enjoy it, because great stuff is coming. You just have to give it a sec and remind yourself that this is a tough time to navigate. And I'm getting emotional talking about it now because I'm getting emotional. This film is just so beautiful. I gave it 5 stars right away. I don't normally do that for films, but this film just hit me in a way that not many films have done in recent memory, and I'm so grateful a film like this exists. Cinema is one of my first loves, and to see cinema like this that just moved me to the point of tears even talking about it for you guys, like, it's a beautiful film. I cannot recommend it enough. Cooper Raiff, incredible director. I can't wait to go watch his first film. This is only his second film, and he's only in his mid-20s, and he is delivering at the highest level. And if this is only the beginning, he is going to have the best career. I cannot wait to see what he has in store for us later. So there we go. There's my best of the fest. Those are all the films I saw at the Sundance Film Festival. It got a little emotional talking about my own life, but I think the best films are the ones that really open up those emotions, whether it be emotionally, sentimentally, like Cha Cha Real Smooth, or even opening the emotions of utter shock and just getting excited to watch a film like Fresh. This was a really great slate of films, and if I had to say there was one film that I liked the best, it was Cha Cha Real Smooth, but all these films in my top 5 and even some of my honorable mentions are worth checking out as they trickle out throughout the year. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to see what else I'm doing, subscribe to the channel. There are more reviews coming as more movies come out. The Batman is almost a month away. I cannot wait. Celebrity Big Brother is right around the corner, so I'll also be talking about that on my podcast Recipe for Reality. A lot of great stuff going on the channel, and I'm so grateful for you all for watching and for joining me here today, and for liking, subscribing, commenting, whatever you do to help this channel grow. It is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.